Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to IORadio with your host, Adam R. Smith. Sal is away on some other projects, so we're going to be doing some solo shows until he has more time. On today's podcast, we have a follow-up with our infamous crypto unicorn, Ryan, from last episode. I wanted to follow up and see what has changed, if anything, in his perspective, and if he's done anything different or unusual, and whether or not our discussion kind of affected him and his perspective on crypto and Bitcoin. So this is a bit of a long episode. It's over 2 hours, but I'm just going to let the whole thing just roll the way we discussed it. I think you may find it interesting, and there's some definitely, like in the last episode, there's some things towards the end that are very revelatory and maybe even shocking. So be sure to listen and let us know what you think by leaving comments in the YouTube video at American Scream Video. That's YouTube/American Scream Video. So on with the show.
Last time we talked, and I was aghast at how bad my audio was, so I went and got a little better microphone, so hopefully that helps out.
Oh yeah, you definitely sound a lot better.
Awesome.
I know you're probably hearing some echo. Let me plug my headphones in. All right, test 1, 2.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, cool. Forgive me, man. Everything's blooming out here. My allergies have gone nuts, so I'm coughing and sneezing and clearing my throat.
No, I know that feeling. Since the last time we talked, I was kind of in and out of illness, and I was like, man, I'm not gonna even when I felt like I could talk, I was like, I'm gonna sound so obnoxious that I better just wait a little bit. But I'm feeling all right now. So,
no worries. Well, I say let's just jump into it, and So first off, I want to welcome you back. It's been, I guess, what 4 weeks since we last talked.
Yeah, I think this is the 3 weeks now. So I have had a bit of a chance to kind of, synthesize our last conversation and look into some of the stuff that was brought up, and we can touch on some of that stuff too. I've got a little bit of I sat down and made some notes, hopefully guide us through. But I know we left off kind of in an inauspicious place with the whole Tether thing.
Yeah, that's always a kind of a weird thing to like leave hanging in the air, huh?
Yeah, right. So I did look into that in the intervening time, and I guess the conclusion I've come to, you'll probably have more insight into this than me still, but what I can tell is that this is kind of a known unknown. And what I mean by that is, if you asked me what's going to happen with Tether at this point, at vis-a-vis Bitcoin, I'm almost dead certain that Tether at some point is going to implode. Because there's, it's completely opaque, right? Like it's just another black box that's sitting beside Bitcoin, just the same way. I kind of put it in the same box as all those other risks like FTX or, anything else that has collapsed due to its nature. So their business model, it's like, man, they're printing money over there, so good for them. But as it relates to Bitcoin, I don't go so far as to see it as existential crisis. I put it more in the, if I'm a investor or speculator on Bitcoin, Tether would worry me. Because
so
at any
it's
moment,
like a short-term problem only.
I think it would probably cause a pretty dramatic crisis of confidence, just like FTX did. Like I think FTX's effect on the price, wasn't it like 20% drop or something? And so that Tether could be more impactful. It could be less impactful, but I think it would end up being a short-term problem. And I think that it doesn't really, affect the core proposition of Bitcoin. It's just going to scare a lot of people who are operating in that space, who have any type of, if they're using Tether for inflows and outflows, it's going to spook a lot of people. And that it's not going to be the last time that happens either. Like on this, it's going to happen many times. So if you're in a position where your time horizon is really short and you're hopping into and out of Bitcoin, yeah, it's one of those like ticking time bombs that could just wipe you out, and you have to account for that.
But you somehow think that it doesn't really have a significant impact on the long-term value of Bitcoin?
I guess depending on your time horizon, like if I people are really bad, I think, at forecasting this type of stuff. All I can do, like I said, is I can definitively say I think this is going to blow up
Right.
just because of the X's and O's on the ground with it.
Right.
It seems inevitable to me. It's something that's made by and managed by people with minimal oversight and transparency. There's plenty of opportunity for malfeasance.
See, I would say the
They
same
do,
thing about Bitcoin itself. I would say it fits those qualities as well.
right. And that's the whole reason for our discussions.
Hmm.
I want to admit at the top of this show right now, I have this didn't really occur to me, I think, until later. And I thought about it and I was like, why did I choose to start talking to you? Why did I reach out and all of this? And I think the reason I came up with is that we touched on this a little bit, and I think some of the people in the comments on the video on the last time brought this up. It's like, okay, I'm doing all of this stuff on my own accord, right? I don't have a partner in it with me. I mean, I have a family, obviously, so my success is their success and my failure is their failure. But at some point, I know I am going to have to, or maybe not have to, but be asked to talk to people, my friends or family, about Bitcoin and about crypto and about all of this
Ah,
stuff.
so I'm kind of like a little test dummy you can crash against, huh?
Yeah, in a way,
That's
I think
cool.
it's like, yeah. Well, I chose you. Not only was it because you kind of put the lure out there, you were looking for people to talk to, but also the amount of time that you spent thinking about this and the amount of thoughts that you have written out about it and everything. It said to me like, okay, if I talk to Adam and I come away from this feeling either, more sure about my thoughts and my assumptions, and I feel like I can talk to it intelligently and not make a complete ass out of myself, then I probably am in a good enough place to talk to somebody like my spouse or my parents or my siblings
Right.
or whatever else. People whom, I want to do the most right by. And I view you as, this is not an insult, but like the final boss, right? And I'm like, if I can talk to Adam and feel confident in, like I said, in my thoughts and in my assumptions about it, then I feel like I might have something there. And I feel like preparing myself for the inevitability of having to talk to either,
Yeah, I think
you
that's
know,
fair.
yeah.
I
So,
mean, and you're not alone. This is not uncommon. Really, there's a lot of people that come into the Buttcoin subreddit, which is the largest crypto critical social media community, that do that as well. They tangle with us because it's a test of how sure they are of what they believe in, and
mhm.
whether they can hold their own. It's unfortunate that a lot of them don't last very long. Now they accuse us of being unfair because we've heard the same talking points so many times that we don't have as much tolerance for them. So we get accused of being an echo chamber for not tolerating them to just say the same 29 things over and over. And we keep saying, "Yeah, but you haven't proven those talking points. You use those as kind of suppositions. And this happened in our first podcast episode. You just were like, Bitcoin is hard money, and then Bitcoin is this, and Bitcoin is forever, and then you kind of move on, and you know, I would take note of those claims in the first place and unpack them. And I don't want to dive back down into that, but that's kind of what we do. And
Right.
we've, all of the arguments of scarcity means it's going to increase in value, and that it's code is law, and that, like we had a big discussion last time about consensus. And
Hmm.
many crypto people just use the word consensus. Oh, consensus will fix things. And, that's why we like to talk about very specific scenarios, because then we can apply this concept of consensus and see how it actually manifests, or it would manifest in a real situation. So I do want to kind of get into some specifics with you. So before we address any points you have, I would like to get a little bit more background on your setup with Bitcoin and crypto. So
Okay.
in the last episode, we got all the way to the end where, and then you finally revealed you had over $1 million in Bitcoin, and it was basically your entire life savings in terms of savings, right?
And everything that's long term that has a horizon of beyond 5 years. Yeah.
Now, I've had some people ask, "Hey, did this guy give you proof?" And my response was, I didn't ask for any proof, but I don't see any reason for you to lie. If you want to provide anything that you might think would confirm what you're saying is true, you're welcome to. Like I said before, we often assume that a lot of the people that say that they have so much of this crypto are not always being honest. And I can't tell you how many times in our community somebody has said, I've gone all in on crypto. And then we look at their post history, and like 3 months ago, they were asking, how does crypto work?
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things, like even in the moment, I wasn't expecting you to ask me those questions, by the way, and I got very, very nervous and shell shocked about it because I had no intention of revealing any of that information because, it's mine and mine
Right.
alone. And quite honestly, one of the riskiest and stupidest things I've ever done is talk about this to the broader internet, right? Like it makes you a target and whatever
Right.
else. And so I had moments where I was like, oh shit, that was dumb. I shouldn't have done that. And
Well, that's why we obviously want, there's no indication of who you are in real life and anything like that. I
right.
do want to ask you a few things, though. I'm very curious specifically. So now you have two wallets that are full of approximately $1 million worth of Bitcoin. I don't even know how many Bitcoin that is. Do you have any rough idea of like, is that,
Uh,
I haven't done the math.
in total, I think it's somewhere like it's north of 12.
Okay.
I haven't checked the total
So
numbers on one.
I'm curious, how much have you put in over time and in what increments? Like,
Hmm.
what was your initial foray into crypto? Like, when did you first hold crypto and how much was it?
Yeah, I touched on this a little bit in the last episode, and I'll do a quick rewind. So, I got sucked in as just a looky-loo, speculator in the 2017 bull run,
Hmm.
and got my ass handed to me and got out of it.
Now, how much did you put at that time?
Uh, at that time, probably I don't know, 1,000, maybe a little bit more.
Okay,
Um,
how did you go about doing that? So you set up an account at say
mhm.
at Coinbase or something?
Yeah, it was just the way the most that everybody does is like you go to the most popular exchange, Coinbase. I did the typical, like I said, analog investor brain where it's like, well, I'm going to diversify because that's just the conventional wisdom, right? And I buy the top 10 cryptos, I spread it out over however many couple of $100,000, whatever. And I'm
Is
just like, well, let's see if any of these lottery tickets hit,
Okay, so
right?
you initially put about 100 grand into it. Then you said a
Oh, no, no, no.
thousand.
I'm sorry. I said hundreds.
Oh,
That probably
hundreds.
came out wrong. It,
Oh,
it was it was about $1,000
gotcha.
all told, spread out across like 10 different
Okay, so
currencies.
initially in 2017, you set up your Coinbase account and you dabbled with crypto. Did you ever have any problems dealing with Coinbase? Did they KYC you? What was that process?
No, I mean everybody KYCs you. Like that's just how it goes for any of these places. But I never had any, luckily, never had any customer service type of problems with Coinbase because boy, if you do, good luck.
Right.
When I started checking out the Coinbase subreddit, like it's just a litany of, oh my God, Coinbase ruined my life. They stole my money. I
Yep.
can't do this. I can't do that. And so luckily my time in that space was pretty short. I used Coinbase for my second entry point, but it was quite brief.
Okay, so is Coinbase the only exchange that you've used?
No.
What other exchanges have you used?
At this point, I use two exchanges. I use River for effectively like just my DCA, right? So everything that I'm just every day churning out.
I'm not
Okay,
even
this part.
familiar with that exchange.
Yeah, it's the reason I use it is that they claim to have full reserves, which I mean,
Is it an
whatever.
American company?
I would imagine so. I haven't looked into it, but The reason I went with them, honestly, is one of my favorite Bitcoin enthusiasts slash I don't know what you call that type of person, but Bitcoin expert recommended it, and then I looked into it, and they don't have any fees for recurring purchases, which in this environment when you're talking about investments and the potential for growth, like those fees could turn out to be a lot of money. And
So
it also has a lot of friendly automation built into it that like set it and forget it. I can have it to where every purchase I make just instantly shoots out to my cold storage and I don't have to think about it. So I'm not constantly, futzing with that.
I gotcha. So, um, so you're using a couple of different exchanges, but mainly Coinbase, and you've been so. Um, I'm just curious, over what periods of time did you put how much into these wallets? Like,
Right.
did
Yeah.
you obviously you kind of limped in and then got beat up a little bit in 2017, and then you
hmm
came back and you decided to play it a little bit more what long game, right? Is that when you started DCAing,
Uh,
or is that a newer thing?
the DCA thing is probably newer, at least the automated DCA. I would just kind of do it manually until I joined up with River. I think I have basically three big epochs as it relates to me getting into Bitcoin or crypto as a whole, right? And that first epoch is that 2017 bull run. Like I said, I was just a visitor, a tourist in crypto land. I touched the electric fence and ran away.
Mm-hmm.
And then a couple of years later, 2019, I went back in, and I think at that point, I think it was just Ethereum and Bitcoin at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't last too long with Ethereum. It was maybe like a year. I got out of Ethereum in total when they I forget when they moved to
When they moved to proof of stake.
when they moved to proof of stake.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was when I finally because I had Ethereum just chilling in the background. It's like, okay, it's a nominal position I'm holding in it, and I still had that like, well, maybe this is going to turn out to be a thing. I'll wait around and see whatever else.
Okay.
But it was mostly Bitcoin at that point, and I was using Coinbase for the initial second jump back in.
And
And
how much liquidity did you put in the second time? I guess.
right, so the second time around, I think I made it up to like, it was most of my like it wasn't anything I had involved in retirement, right? It was all long to mid-term savings.
Mm-hmm.
So savings that I would most likely have been using. Like I said, I at that point in 2019 when I jumped in again, I knew at that point, like I've got a growing family. I'm going to need to buy a home.
So
I've
was
got these
most of your
big.
savings just sitting in a savings account at that time?
No. I was a bogglehead, so I was sitting in, to that point, S&P index
Oh,
funds,
okay.
right?
So
Yeah,
so
yeah,
you were properly invested, and you liquidated that and went into crypto.
correct.
And
Yeah.
so how much was that?
So it was probably around
Okay.
$20,000, $30,000.
So you're
Um,
slowly ramping up. I'm just trying to figure out how we get to a
mhm.
million.
Yeah, how do we get there, right? So that's the second epoch is I think I can't remember when I completely got out of the S&P game. Um,
You didn't
I
have
guess
any
I
desire to
actually
just keep a little bit in there still?
no, well, I tell you what, I got out entirely from I know when I got out entirely, and that was when the ETFs dropped, the Bitcoin ETFs dropped because
Okay. Well, that was
uh
recently
Va-
then.
yeah, well, it was recently. I did hold I was with Vanguard for a very long time. I was a huge like an advocate
Yeah.
of their style of investing, and
Mm-hmm.
then when I heard that they weren't going to be supporting any Bitcoin ETFs,
Oh,
I said I,
fuck
I you know
Vanguard, huh? I'll tell you,
well
the rest of
well
us are like, yay, Vanguard.
no, I'm sure you are, and the thing is that like it pains me because I believe in Vanguard, and for a long time they were who you
Right.
wanted to
They're a
be
true
with, and
fiduciary. They really do
yeah, yeah,
act in the best interest of their clients. They have a long, long track record of doing that compared with other securities firms.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so did it occur to you you could be wrong? Because they have a long history of not screwing their clients over with fees and stuff.
I know. Well, I'm just layering onto this cake more and more about like I'm breaking with,
Okay.
it really, I was upset when I had to do that. Like I was like, you're not even going to allow me the opportunity. Like I understand if you don't want to put out your own, like whatever else, but they were like, no, you're not going to be allowed to do that with your own money, which it kind of pissed me off, honestly.
I understand.
And so I jumped out of there.
You
Uh,
keep in mind, there's a lot of people that said, if you put Bitcoin in these funds, we're pulling our stuff out. So they probably got it from both sides.
yeah, I'm sure they
I
did.
mean, if you're a
They're
fund manager that really is looking at the fundamentals, you're investing in things that create value. And this is the thing, Bitcoin doesn't create any value. It's just totally speculative.
Well, that's the dividing line between you and I is that, what is value, right? And we'll get to
Mm-hmm.
that in a second, but let me finish up my little autobiography here.
Yes.
So yeah, a few tens of thousands of dollars in Bitcoin at that point. It wasn't all Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of divided this up. I don't know what the ratio was. Um, I was kind of ramping up as my conviction ramped up, as my
Gotcha.
understanding and my competency ramped up, as I got more confident in it.
And also keep
Um,
in mind, during this time, you were not talking with anybody else. Your
no, no,
confidence
no.
was pretty much getting ramped up, right, in a very narrow little bubble that you were with certain influencers, right? You weren't bouncing this off of anybody. Hey, what do you think about crypto, right?
Well, no, I would engage with detractors quite willingly. It was just I didn't find it super educational,
I got you.
Like it was a lot of
A lot
it
of
was a lot of
dismissal, right? They're like, ugh,
yeah,
yeah.
it was very counterproductive, and I
That's a problem we have in the
so
community. There's people. It's like a creationist comes upon an evolutionary biologist and says, "Well, yeah, evolution is fake."
yeah,
That guy's going to go, "Oh, geez." Some people
right.
just don't have the patience to go, "Why is it that you think that?" And
Well, and the other thing is that the people who can speak intelligently to this, it's almost like the detractors have an even harder job because you have to learn something and then learn the other side of it
right,
too and be able to talk to both of it as opposed to just, well, I can learn just about Bitcoin and just about the value propositions and all the claims and whatever else. And then if I don't turn that looking glass around. So it's more work, I think,
Brandolini's
but
principle, right?
yeah,
Which says,
yeah.
that it takes an order of magnitude more resources and time to debunk bullshit than it does to put it out there.
Yeah, and that I'm gonna put a pin in that idea because I wanted to talk to you about that.
So I
Because
want,
I agree with that concept. So let me wrap this real quick.
yeah,
So I had my kind of let's just call it a 50-50 split since it probably was close to that. And like I said, I in retrospect, I regretted I was probably a little too aggressive at that point just because I don't I don't know that my aptitude probably matched my investment allocation quite right. And I also looking back on it and I'm fairly um fairly certain about, like I said, the waves that Bitcoin travels in, and if the timing hadn't been right, I just happened to liquidate some of my Bitcoin for that house purchase that I was going on. I thought my house purchase was going to happen probably 5+ years down the road, and it ended up not. Like,
okay. So let's talk
things
about that because this
move
is the point
fast.
that I've been wanting. This is where I've been steering this, right?
Hmm.
You've put liquidity into the market. You've put liquidity into the market. My big question is how much experience do you have trying to pull liquidity back out? Because that, to many of us critics, is a real point of concern,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
We call it Crypto Hotel California. You can check in, but you can never leave. And it's a,
Yeah.
it's a recurring theme of people that talk about how easy it is to go into the casino and gamble, and then they get a big stack of chips, and then they try to cash out.
And they
And
say nope. Yeah.
the cashier goes, "Yep, I don't like this ID. Sorry."
Yeah. Yeah. I can't dismiss that concern at all. I think that's very, very valid. My personal experience is just mine and mine alone. So it's only one data point in a sea of experiences and all
Well,
that.
let's talk
I
about this
didn't I
data
didn't
point. I'm curious what the
yeah.
details of this data point is. So at some point, you had a whole bunch of crypto holdings and you needed to get some cash to be able to finance a house purchase, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So
I
how
had I think
much, how what did you liquidate and how much did you move?
Yeah, so I think I ended up getting up to like 40 or 50 grand worth of Bitcoin at that point when the house purchase stuff kind of jumped up and bit me. Like
Hmm.
buying a home is such a weird experience. I call it like close to whitewater rafting, especially
Believe me, I
if you're in
know.
a yeah, like it's like you just, one day you're kind of wish casting, sitting around on the couch and talking about it with your wife, like wouldn't it be nice to have this kind of home or blah 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 or maybe that neighborhood. And then after you call a realtor, it's like a week later, you're literally in the thick of things. So it jumped up and bit me. And
Oh
like I
yeah.
said, I regret that I was probably too aggressive and too haphazard and could have backed myself into a bad corner there. But at that point, like I said, I have about 40 or 50 grand. And I'll never forget this moment because it was hilarious. The financier at the bank that the mortgage company I was working with, he's doing his due diligence on my financial profile, right? And I go to let him know, like, hey, I have these holdings, I have this investment, um, and I just want you to consider that, put that in your
Right.
pool of data that you're using to assess me as a creditor or whatever.
Right. Your
And
obviously your portfolio holdings speak to your net worth, and that's part of
yeah,
the process when you apply for a loan. The banks will want to see that. Hmm.
and
So you
this
presented them
guy.
your crypto portfolio, and what
Yeah,
happened?
and and so you know where this is. I think you're already ahead of me. So this guy goes, he says two things, and one of them I find funny because I don't think it's true at all, and the other one I guess I kind of understand. He said, you need to take that money out of Bitcoin and you need to put it into, a proper bank account because otherwise we're not gonna consider it.
Right.
And I that was probably more to the volatility of the asset because like, hey, if it reads this one day and then it drops 20%, like it's just something that they can't reliably calculate. So he said he wanted to take that money out and let it simmer to prove that like, okay, this investment is here and it's real and it's going to be able to back up
Right. And
whatever
also,
whatever.
banks are, depending upon where you're at in the jurisdictions, banks are restricted in what they can use as collateral and what they consider liquidity, right?
Right,
And
right.
I think crypto is definitely a hazy gray area at best.
Hmm.
I mean, it's bad enough that banks will use real estate as collateral, but they have a whole long history and an infrastructure of knowing how to deal with that if it worse came to worse and they needed to turn that into liquidity.
Hmm.
Crypto is
Hmm.
a whole nother monster that
Yeah,
none of these banks want to mess with.
right. And so he told me that, which I I've talked to myself. I'm like, that's a pretty reasonable thing to ask. Whatever. So I pulled it out, and it didn't like I think I pulled out about half my stack, and
So when you say
immediately
pull it out,
liquidated it.
you logged into Coinbase and
Hmm.
you sold your Bitcoin and Ethereum. Did you sell it straight for fiat on account there, or did you transfer it into a stable coin?
So I think at that point I was out of Ethereum. I think I had moved away so I didn't hold any Ethereum. I just sold it straight out on Coinbase and then literally did the
To
wire
USD.
transfer to USD, got it out. It sat in my bank account
Was
for a
that
couple
was
of
that
months.
one transaction, like one limit transaction?
Uh, I don't know what the limit was. It might have had to be multiple, but I don't think it was. It wouldn't surprise me if looking back on it, it was like two transactions and not one.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't honestly have any problem.
So basically, two transactions that netted you about 40 or 50,000.
No, like I said, I liquidated about half.
So
So
about
I ended
20
up,
grand.
it was about 25 grand. Yeah.
Okay, so you pulled 25,000 out and you sold straight to cash. You didn't touch any stable coins, and then you just
No,
transferred that money into your account through
into my
Coinbase.
bank account. Yep. Yep.
Were there any delays or charges in that transfer?
Uh, if there were, they didn't affect my bottom line, right? It didn't like screw up a transaction or it didn't cost me enough to make me angry.
I assume though
Um,
it took at least several days, right?
it probably did.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then so the other, I
Which
didn't
is perfectly
finish.
reasonable, but this speaks to one of the misconceptions that crypto people say. I'm not saying you say that, but they say I can send money around the world instantly, right? And maybe you can transfer Bitcoin from one wallet address to another, but converting that into money still means it has to pass through the same
Oh yeah,
systems that
yep.
have that delay that's there for consumer protections.
Hmm.
So crypto doesn't really improve upon that model because you can't take Bitcoin and obviously, as you know, use it as a down payment on a house,
Yeah. Well, it's funny. So the other thing the guy said that made me laugh is he said there's no way to verify it, and I
Mm-hmm.
was like, actually, it's the most verifiable asset on the planet. Like it literally, I could show you
No,
my
he's right
keys.
though. He's right. He's right. You okay? So you have the private keys, but somebody else could have those private keys too, and whoever has the private keys controls it. You can't prove you're the only person on the planet that has access to your wallet. You just don't know. You hope so
Well,
because you've been very careful, right? But you
so
you
that
don't know.
that's an unfair point because that applies to every single asset. There's no
No, because if I own the title to something, if I
well,
can
the
prove
title, yeah,
I can
like
prove my
a house or a
identity,
car.
yeah, I can prove who I am, then I can take control of that. But with
But that's
crypto,
that that's a limited like you're talking about the only two things that really operate that way that I know of are cars and homes, and those things are not generally going to be. I mean, I guess they could. I've never used one as collateral for anything,
well,
but
you talk
um,
about Bitcoin as having an immutable ledger. There's ledgers all over the place that traditional society uses, receipts, transactions in point of sale systems, phone call records. So if something was stolen of mine, right, and it was
mhm.
found, if I can produce a reasonable amount of evidence that shows that I am the original purchaser and owner of that, I can legally claim that's mine and it will be enforced. In the world of crypto, it's basically whoever has access to the wallet, and there's no way to 100% prove that only one person has that, right?
Yeah, proving. I mean, that's kind of like the old you can't prove a negative.
Right.
I
Hmm.
can't prove to you that no one else knows these things,
And
but
because there's no
I
take
can.
backsies, right? There's no consumer
Yeah,
protections.
because it's final
Yeah.
settlement, right? Because and that's so I'm going to I guess let me jump to the final chapter here. So the house thing goes by pretty smoothly, right? Like
Hmm.
if and obviously if that had been a pain in the ass, like it probably would have put a significant damper on my enthusiasm,
Right.
or if something had gone wrong, which it totally could have. And so that was the second epoch. Third epoch now is when I converted my IRAs.
And you went all
So,
in.
and that was 100% conversion. And I have I hired a consultancy to walk me through the process, get all the legal stuff in line. And now effectively, I just, earlier in the year, I made my yearly contribution to my IRA and did it totally in Bitcoin.
Hmm. Okay, so first epoch 1,000, second epoch what 20 that 50,000,
Yeah, you
and
could
then the
call it
third
that.
epoch was that is that like more than a half a million, 700,000,
Yeah,
eight
I was
hundred
going to say that was probably somewhere in the order of like I said, when I started, the difference in its worth now to then is like 3-4x. So, but yeah, you're basically adding a zero every single epoch
Okay,
at that point.
so if so your unrealized profit is probably 100, at least 100%. So you probably you have your portfolio is worth at least a million, and you're saying
Hmm.
that you never put more than a half a million liquidity into it of your own.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a nice return in quotes. One of
Hmm.
the arguments that I make, people say, not your keys, not your coins. Right? If you don't have the keys to the wallet, those coins are not yours. Our version of that is not your fiat, not your value. So you can't claim you have any value unless it is in actual money. So whatever it looks like on paper or on your phone in your portfolio listing, that's unrealized profit, as crypto people like to say, the
Hmm.
value of their portfolio. And they compare it to having a stock portfolio or a bank account balance. But the difference is stocks are much more heavily regulated. The market is much more solvent and stable, and there's all kinds of facilities and checks and balances to make sure that you'll always be able to sell your stock and you'll always be able to get your money out of the account. In crypto, those checks and balances, the oversights, the transparency, the regulations, and the authorities protecting consumers are just not there. So it bothers me that so many people in the crypto world just take for granted those same levels of protections are there. Like, I can always get my money out. Here's what my portfolio is worth. And I would argue that's a big concern. And this is where we're getting at. And this is why I wanted to drill down into some specifics. So from what I gather, the most you've ever pulled out is about 25,000, right?
Yeah, it wouldn't be more than 5 figures.
See, this is what really, really concerns me. And I've had friends that have done the same thing. They've DCA'd, they've set up wallet things, and everything looks great until they try to take out more than they put in. And when that happens, suddenly things go wrong. And it's been very
Can you
consistent.
give some examples?
Sure. One of my best friends, again, I didn't get into this arbitrarily, just waking up one morning saying I don't like crypto. I had friends ask me, they knew I was the computer guy, the tech guy. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? So I dove into it and got back with them, and I said, I don't think this is a good idea to do. And of course they did it anyway, and some of them listened to me and some of them didn't. I'll tell you one specific story of several I have from my friends. A good friend of mine, he contacted me and he said, his ex-wife had told him about this crypto thing. She was making really good money. She talked him into doing it. So he put about 5 or 10,000 into this wallet, and he was getting those returns. And I said to him, dude, this is a scam. You need to get your money out. You need to get your money out. And he kind of listened to me, and he said, I'm not putting a whole lot in there that I can't afford to lose. So I totally understand. I'm just kind of playing around with it. And I'm like, I understand that. But if you really want to see if it's legit, try to take he says like, I'm up 200%. And I said, well, if you really want to see how legit it is, see if you can take your original principal out. And he told the same thing to his ex-wife, and she had a lot more money into it. She had like 30 or 40,000.
So can we identify like what environments they were operating in and what assets they had, or is that too?
I forget what it was, but it was some wallet scheme. It wasn't a major exchange. So they got hoodwinked into one of the little side hustles that involved some custom software they downloaded and set up on their phone, and they sent their things to. It was completely a scam, but it looked totally legit. And I checked out the website and I checked out all this stuff, and it looked legit. But then I started tracking down who the owner was, and he had an Instagram account of him with Lambos and all kinds of shit. And I'm like, okay.
So did they just get rug pulled or something, or did they like?
So what happened was and this is what he told me. He said he pulled out most of his original, and then when he tried to pull out anything beyond that, there started to become problems with the account. And then the developers sent out a notice saying that one of their programmers had screwed something up, and they were insolvent all of a sudden, and they were going to adjust everybody's balances, and they're to like 17% of what they were. And then of course the guy's Instagram with all of the fancy shit just immediately went offline. His ex-wife lost everything. He was never able to get any of the money out. And he's a lawyer, so he's involved in a class action against this. But these people were in Hong Kong or something like that.
Yeah,
so
good luck.
It's gone. Now he told me he got his principal out. That might have been him just wanting to save face but I don't have any reason to believe that he would. But this is the problem, right? You hear the success stories. You hear the people bragging about how much they've won. A lot of people that lose in this industry, it's like being taken advantage of by one of those telephone scammers. They're so embarrassed that they fell for it. The pig butchering scams, that they're not going to tell anybody. It's kind of shameful. Now, obviously, Coinbase is a little bit more legit than what I'm talking about. But as you know,
I'm no fan of Coinbase,
you go on
honestly.
there,
So
you go on the Coinbase subreddit, and it's nothing but people going, Coinbase locked my account. It's been 2 months. I can't get any help. Now, what we don't see, because for every 5 of those, there's one person going, I just pulled my money out. It was perfectly cool. I don't know what you guys are talking about. This is a bunch of FUD. What we don't see there is what the numbers are, right? It might be perfectly okay if you've got under $50,000 or $100,000, but it might be a whole nother situation if you try to liquidate $500,000 or $1 million worth of this stuff. That might not be anywhere near as easy. And this is what concerns me now that you've gone all in. If you wanted to pull out, say, 200 grand, or if you're up 100%, why not pull out your original principal that you put in and then let the rest just ride?
yeah, why not let the take the
Yeah,
the balance?
Because if you take
I
take
saw
the $500,000
attitude.
out and put it back in your Vanguard index fund, then you are sitting totally sweet. You know what I mean? You're playing red, black, and 00, at the same time,
Yeah,
and
I guess
you can't lose.
yeah. So yeah, I saw a couple of comments to that end saying like, "Hey man, you're up enough. Like, take the win and go." Um, and that's pretty traditional casino thinking. And if I were playing with other cryptos, if I were playing with those man-made, for lack of a better term, shitcoins, I would, because I know that is a casino. And if I were constantly moving my money in and out of a custodian that deals in things other than Bitcoin, yeah, I would consider it luck and a win to be able to move in and out of there. So that's why I really only deal with Bitcoin only products and services at this point. The stories that like you just told, yeah, I mean that's what
Well,
you
look,
get
remember,
whenever
I
you,
mean, Coinbase is not necessarily any less vulnerable than any other exchange. I mean, FTX was considered just as legit as Coinbase, maybe more
Mm,
so.
I mean, I have to disagree with that. I consider the exchanges that and the products that deal with shitcoins to be bigger targets. And
Well,
and
how else would you liquidate your Bitcoin other than going through Coinbase?
I
Or
mean, it's an interesting thought exercise.
you gonna call up Michael Saylor?
Yeah, I guess I could. Um, so this is a series of questions that, because my time horizon's so long, it's hard for me to forecast what life with Bitcoin is going to look like in 10 to 20 years, Um, I can only really say what I know, which way the wind is blowing. And to me, the market for the services around Bitcoin are only getting better and more secure and more stable as time goes on.
I don't necessarily see
So
that though.
well, I have a hard time thinking otherwise, but we can pocket that. So
Well, we can talk specifics. Like we can say, okay, now we got ETFs. But if you look at ETFs, the main inflows into the ETFs are from the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. So it's more of a lateral move, right? It's more of liquidating Grayscale shares and converting them into cheaper ETFs. We're not seeing
yeah,
this big rush of retail interest into crypto.
well, I've been watching those numbers, and yeah, whenever the ETFs came out, it was just like, wait a minute, what's going on? And it turned out that it was just Grayscale effectively leaking all of its value out. And that's slowed down over time, and it's only going to slow down more. So
Right.
that's
And then you've
uh,
got the halvening, which I fail to understand why people think that it's going to have more of a positive than a negative impact on the market. Right?
well.
People
Let
just
me,
assume the price
yeah.
of Bitcoin is just going to go up because there's going to be less introduced, but that's not the
I mean,
dynamic that sets the price. The
it's one
dynamic
of
that
them,
sets the
right?
price is popularity.
Well, popularity slash supply slash demand, right? Like, and that's demand being popularity.
But we
I
know
mean,
we know
it's
that scarcity is not a guarantee of value, and scarcity is not a guarantee of demand.
no, it's not. And I was gonna try to walk down and future cast like, okay, when it's time for me to retire, which is what this whole project for me is about, what am I expecting to have happen? When it comes time to exit the Bitcoin space,
You have
or
to think about this. I mean, even I
yeah,
know you're
well,
saying to yourself,
yeah.
that's not going to be. It's 10 years, 15 years away. But what if there's a health problem or something happens and you need this money and you need to get 100K? You should. You should.
Well, I have other, but if I'm draining my retirement over a health problem, something has, I got bigger fish to fry.
Okay. So I mean, maybe this is. Uh, so you still have a reasonable amount of liquidity then, I take it, elsewhere.
So the way that I see this playing out is that when I feel like I sit down and I can finally say, okay, I can actually retire, right? Or what I consider to be retirement, whatever that
Mm-hmm.
is. I'll have, a fixed level of expenses because I'm not providing for children and all these other things. I've got a lot of other things paid off or whatever else. Um, I think it's going to be handled one of two ways. Either the space will have matured enough to the point where I can borrow against the Bitcoin, right? So that's like the ideal scenario because then you're not having to pay taxes and all that, which, morally speaking, it's just it's the law. I didn't make it. I'm not necessarily saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it just is right now.
Mm-hmm.
So you either do that or you get to a space where, okay, I have a defined set like expenses and I can exit bit by bit, month by month, according to what my expenses are going to be. And it shouldn't be like, okay, I'm rocking up to, unless there's been some serious inflation that went on in the intervening years, which there might still be, but I'm not going to be rocking up to these exchanges or these banks with like, a $500,000 in Bitcoin and being like, hey, hand over the cash, like it should be a little more steady and
So
less.
you hope that the freedom to be able to transact is going to get easier in the future instead of more difficult.
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm betting on, right? My behavior is betting on that.
Right.
And
So, but the thing is I picture in my mind, and I do these thought experiments of the different directions that this market can go, and I see a lot more evidence of different ways in which it can fail than I do see different ways in which it can succeed. To me, the one thing that makes Bitcoin succeed is an ever increasing confidence in popularity, because that's the dynamic. If you don't, I mean, Bitcoin doesn't have any utility to anybody. They just have to
yeah,
believe in it as an abstract token of value.
well, we keep coming back to that point, right?
Right.
It's that you keep saying I don't think this thing has any use, and clearly I disagree, right? And
What use does it have?
well, let's
Give me a specific example.
for a moment, we'll cover that. So for a moment, this is one of the things I thought of long and hard after our first conversation was I didn't feel like we did a very good job of defining success and failure.
Okay.
And for like whenever I talk to a critic or a detractor, one of the things I can never, it's like getting blood out of a stone, is saying, can you ever define for me when you think Bitcoin has succeeded?
Okay. I'll
Right?
give you some definitions.
Okay.
And I do this in my documentary too. Um, uh, Bitcoin has been introduced as a whole bunch of different things. It's been introduced as a new form of currency. It's been introduced as digital gold. It's been introduced as a disruptive technology. It's been introduced as a hedge against inflation. All of these different things, and every single way that you characterize it, there's a dozen things that you can drill down into and analyze that. Does it make sense? Is it really a hedge against inflation? Is it really a good, reliable, long-term store of value? You can't just gloss over those things and say it is, because they're what are called unstated major premises, right? It's begging the question. When you put something out there without evidence, you're just saying, I believe this is what it is. So, to me, when you say something has uses, there's a difference between having a use and really being like something everybody wants. Like fax machines are still being used right now. That doesn't mean that fax machine technology is going to continue to grow. It just means that there's a small segment of people that prefer to use this technology, even though it's obsolete, or they're hamstrung in some kind of a legacy system where that's the only way that they can do certain things. That doesn't mean that it's going to continue to grow and everybody's going to adopt it. And I would put Bitcoin and blockchain technology in that category. I would say it's an interesting piece of technology, but whether it's going to grow and continue to be adapted on any large level, that's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in whether or not somebody has found a use for it. On our podcast, we've interviewed tons and tons of people who have talked about use cases. The United Nations database where they're keeping track of carbon credits was a, quote, use case for blockchain technology. But did it do anything better than a regular database? And the answer to that is no, it didn't improve upon existing tech. So if you want me to qualify something, I would say, if you're trying to convince me that something, whether it's a new technology or a new form of money or a new way to transfer value or a new way to store value, I need to be convinced that it can materially do something better than what I already have available to me. The closest that we come to Bitcoin trying to address that argument is often by straw manning the status quo, by talking about inflation and the fleeting value of the dollar and the Fed money printer going out of control. It seems like the best way to convince people that they should use crypto is by trying to convince them that the status quo is much worse than it really is. And I think that that's an invalid, dishonest approach. If this money of the future is really better, you shouldn't need to talk shit about the status quo. You shouldn't need to scare me about inflation. You should be explaining to me how and why 100 years from now it's going to be obvious that anybody is going to care about what's on blockchain. And I have not had a convincing argument. You say it's permanent. I say it doesn't look permanent to me, not when it requires so much energy to constantly operate, and that energy doesn't produce anything materially useful. Proof of work doesn't do anything. All that energy just goes to making the network operate. It doesn't.
Yeah.
And so I can't see value or benefit in that.
Yeah, I guess that's where that's the real crux of it, right? It seems so obvious to me, and so it's weird to talk to somebody else who doesn't see the value in it.
So it seems obvious to you because you accept certain presuppositions that I don't. You just see it as, quote, hard money. And I would ask, well, what makes it hard? Why is it hard? And if we drill down into that, I think,
yeah, we get bogged down talking about, but I hate to go through.
Yeah, we don't need to rehash any of that.
I hate to go through first principles stuff all over again, but it feels like we have no choice at some point, because that's the only way we're ever going to bridge the divide between, is this actually useful or is this not? Because
let's do this. Let's think about 25 years from now. What's going to, why do I care? Why should I care about Bitcoin now? And what's going to happen in 25 years that's going to make me regret not caring about it now? What could change in that time period? The general argument is, well, what if everybody starts using it? And that's called the nirvana fallacy, right?
Nah, I don't believe that. I've never heard of that argument, and that's obviously specious right off the top.
Well, a lot of the crypto proponents talk about there's going to come a time when Bitcoin is going to cost so much you're going to wish you got in a long time ago.
Oh yeah, there will, it's one of these things where it's like, if my assumptions are correct, if my calculations are correct, if my guess is correct on this, then there will come a time out of self-preservation when you have to get into Bitcoin. Otherwise, it's going to be financially ruinous to not be in that network.
So what is the dynamic that makes that happen? What causes the price of Bitcoin to go up? And let's unpack that.
So that's only true if what I say is correct, right? Like if it actually
But isn't what you're saying is just you wave your magic wand and in the future it's just worth a lot more? I want to see how you get from point A to point B.
Well, one of the things I wanted to establish is that if all of my presuppositions, if all of my assumptions and my bets on this are correct, then you should agree with me that the end result is going to be, yes, this is going to be more valuable.
Okay. Well, let's
right?
take that. Let's take that. Okay. So
So
let's.
if well, I wanted to bring that up to say, if you don't feel that way, then we need to probably back up a little bit,
Okay.
because we're
Well,
never
let's
going to
back up. Okay. Let's take 3 points in time: point A, point B, and point C. Okay. We're at point B in time. Okay. And point A is the early days of Bitcoin. Point B is the present day. Point C is the future of Bitcoin. Okay. So the value of Bitcoin has a certain number at point A, point B, and point C. Now, we do not know what that number is going to be at point C, but we do know what the number was at point A and point B, and we have data that we can look at that shows what happened in the real world between A and B that affected that price, right? So we could look at the historical mechanisms that affected the price of Bitcoin in the past. And so that is how we would speculate what's going to happen to it in the future. I mean, that's all you've got really with Bitcoin is past performance and hope that future results are going to be similar. So, which obviously is one of those shaky concepts.
I obviously disagree with that statement. And so,
well, what other mechanism would there be for you to believe in Bitcoin going up if it's not the same dynamics that have driven it up thus far?
So if I wanted to,
do you think like something unforeseen is going to happen that's going to make Bitcoin more valuable?
No, not at all, actually. I mean, to me,
what drives Bitcoin's price? What makes Bitcoin desirable and makes people want to pay for it?
So if I were going to set out to engineer the perfect money, right, it would need to be more durable, portable, divisible, fungible, scarce, right? Like those are the assets, the qualities rather, that make a good money.
Again, okay, but note that money, currency, is different from a store of value. Money is meant to be transferred and not hoarded. So there's a
not necessarily.
There's a conflict. There's a conflict of identity with Bitcoin in that respect.
So those definitions are important. And currency versus money, right? They're definitely not the same thing.
Right. Well, currency is the way to transfer value and debt between parties. Money is what those tokens are that are being transferred. And
no, money is just value.
Well, money, the traditional definition, and of course everybody argues about this. My definition of money is that which can be used to pay for most goods and services, most, if not all, goods and services.
Okay, I call that a currency and not money.
Well, currency currency can be something that's just used between two people. You know, I can use chickens as currency with my neighbor if they want chickens. That doesn't mean it's money. That doesn't mean everybody would accept chickens as payment. So I think currency is more contextual and subjective, whereas money is a generic term. If I put a gun to your head and say, "Give me your money," I'm not looking for your Bitcoin. I'm looking for the cash that everybody else uses because that's what I want. You know, if you trade in other things, that's a currency between you and other parties. But when money typically means something that's everybody recognizes as one particular thing, like the dollar is money.
I'd say a currency can be money, but money doesn't necessarily have to be a currency. I think that's fair.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It's good. Money is a broader,
the point I'm making is
broader
that
suitcase term.
A long-term store of investment is something that you wouldn't want to trade routinely. You want to hold on to it and let it appreciate. Currency is designed.
Generally speaking, that's correct. Yeah.
Currency by design is something that's supposed to be a temporary transfer of value. It's not to be hoarded. It's not supposed to appreciate in value. It's not supposed to depreciate in value anytime soon. It's supposed to be relatively stable. And so Bitcoin, in order for Bitcoin to be a reliable currency, it would have to have price stability. But if it had price stability, then it would be an unreliable store of value because it wouldn't increase in value. And that's where Bitcoin is a contradiction. People that talk about it as a currency, it contradicts its nature as a long-term store of value.
I don't think it has to go up in value to be a store of value, right? Like it has to go up in value to be
An
a
investment.
investment.
Investment. Yeah.
But yeah, and I've honestly never much considered it an investment.
Well,
But
if you're holding it and expecting it to go up in value, I wouldn't call it an investment either, because investment
well,
is
I'm
typically
holding
reserved for
it.
things that can create value. Whereas, like, if you buy and sell something, you're only really profiting when you divest yourself of it, when you sell it. So when I think of investing, I think of buying stocks that pay dividends. That way you're getting value without having to liquidate your holdings.
Hmm.
Bitcoin to me is more of a speculative commodity. You buy it, and then you, at some point in the future, when you liquidate yourself, when you divest yourself of it, that's when you see a return. So
Well,
it all gets
yeah.
back to, what is the dynamic that makes you confident that tomorrow it's going to be worth more than it is today?
So my belief is that, like, I've already elucidated on this a little bit. Like, Bitcoin is the most durable thing on the planet to me. Now, obviously, you disagree with that, and that's cool. And that's probably, like I said, we're exposing the cracks between you and I about where we diverge in our opinion of its value. So you would
What
obviously
about
agree
it do
with
you
me
think is
that
durable? What makes it so durable?
if it's a distributed ledger across the world
Okay.
and it takes what, like, twice the computing power of the entire Earth to alter it, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a nefarious way anyway, in an untrue way, then I would consider that pretty durable, right? Like,
Well, okay,
I,
let's play devil's advocate with me. I'm going to give you a hypothetical scenario. Okay. Let's say that in the future, where there's we've got this one world community, and there's a government run boats that go from continent to continent, right? And everybody gets on these boats and they can go back and forth to these continents. And the boat discovers an island that nobody had seen before in the middle of the ocean. And the island has these little tiny monkeys, right? And we do
I
analysis
like
of
where
the
this is going.
we do analysis of these little tiny monkeys, and they're genetically proven to be unique to that island. They're also sterile, and they live forever. They're thousands of years old,
It's a
and
very interesting
yeah,
species, yeah.
yeah. So very very rare, very very scarce, and they don't have any hair. They're all hairless, and they live on this island, and they've been living on this island for thousands, maybe millennia, and everybody thinks they're really really cool. They're super popular. So you can adopt a little tiny monkey, and you get your unique ID tattooed on that monkey, and that's your monkey. That becomes a store of value. So it's there. It's not going anywhere, but they've run out of food on the island, so you have to deliver food to the island on a regular basis to feed the monkeys. But other than that, they live forever. And you can transfer them by scratching out the old person's ID and putting another one. So it becomes this ecosystem. A bunch of people just decide monkey bucks are the new store of
Yeah.
value, because
I see the parallel, yeah.
right. They're absolutely scarce. They're limited. They can live forever as long as you keep feeding them, right?
Hmm.
How hard is monkey money? Would you consider it the world's hardest money?
I mean, if with the way you've described it, sounds like it.
So I would say that's a good parallel to Bitcoin, because um, the monkeys they'll live forever as long as you expend a certain amount of resources just to feed them.
Well,
But if you stop feeding them, they'll
yeah.
all die and they're gone. And the blockchain is the
Well,
same way. If people
no, no,
stop
no.
operating the
We
blockchain, Bitcoin ceases to exist.
that's not correct because it freezes in time, right? There's no more entries on it, but it's still there. Those monkeys are still on that island. Maybe okay, they don't have any energy, so they're just sitting there. They're literally not moving, but they're still there, right? They didn't disappear. They didn't,
Well,
dematerialize.
you're assuming somebody that once people stop mining, somebody keeps a copy of the blockchain. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, because yeah, it might be
Well,
frozen in time, but the point is, even if it's frozen in time, it still can't. There cannot be no more commerce. There
so
can.
I'm guessing the whole feed the monkeys thing, we're getting into miners and transaction fees and all of that, right?
I
Like
mean, that's the
that's the
operation
parallel.
of the blockchain. There's a cost that comes just to keep the system online in
Hmm.
existence. And if nobody wants to pay that cost anymore, and I do know that it can cycle up and down depending upon how many people want to participate, but there's still always going to be somebody expending some level of energy to keep the blockchain running. If at some point it no longer becomes economically viable to do that, then there's no reason to do it, and everything just stops, and then Bitcoin ceases to exist. And we have tens of thousands of other cryptocurrencies that this has happened to. Shitcoins that were created, and now nobody has any interest in them, and their blockchain is no longer being operated. You can't even access any network. Now,
Yeah,
I
but
know it seems
all
unlikely
those
that's going to happen
all
with
those
Bitcoin.
monkeys all those monkeys were not immortal though, right? Like that's the key difference. Those monkeys were centrally controlled and could be, you know, turned off, dematerialized at the stroke of a pen by
Right,
some,
but
dork in his basement.
just like, ironically, the people that depended on monkey money also depended on the state subsidizing the ferry that would bring the food to the monkeys. If the state decided to no longer operate those boats, people would have a hard time even getting to the island. Same thing with the internet. Bitcoin depends upon the internet, which is run by central authorities. And if they decide that they don't want to allow, to run their ferry to the Bitcoin network, they can do that. It's
Yeah, we
technologically
we
possible.
we talked about this last time,
You
right?
just don't
Like
believe it
like
would happen. But I'm saying you can't dismiss the possibility because technically it can happen.
I don't dismiss the possibility, but I put it on such a low order of magnitude that it's,
Gotcha.
acts of God affecting me personally are far more likely than having every country on earth come together and decide, nope, no more Bitcoin.
Right.
And even then, I'm not sure that that would do it. So,
But think
it,
about it like this. If the people that are using these monkeys are doing something that is an affront to the country that's operating the ferry service that feeds them, at some point the country operating the ferry service is going to be, fuck this. I'm not bringing any more food to Monkey Island. I don't have to do this and let them insult me and bypass me and not pay my taxes and all that. And that is a very real thing. It's not like Bitcoin is just this innocuous system that everybody should just live and let live with. Bitcoin is pretty widely regarded as being a huge source of money laundering and dark money and sanctions violations and all kinds of activities that nation states try very, very hard to control. So it's not like it's outside the realm of possibility that nation states would be like, fuck Bitcoin. Because if Bitcoin is
yeah, they
funding
have
terrorism
plenty of
that's
reason.
happening, then and they can. Now maybe they haven't yet, but it's not just an arbitrary decision. I don't like Bitcoin. There's very good reasons why nation states would want to clamp down on this.
Yeah, and they'll dress it up with all types of reasons, right? Hey, money laundering, terrorism, drugs, whatever else.
Right.
Um, and I'm pretty clear-eyed about the threat that something like Bitcoin poses to a sovereign nation that doesn't submit to it as as a tool that could help them. They're saying, okay, well, if this thing is competing with my currency, that's a problem, and that's why I've never been too hot to trot to say, oh, Bitcoin, the money of the future or currency of the future, and all that. It just doesn't strike me as that'll
Well,
happen
also this notion
whenever it needs to happen.
Bitcoin can help people. That's another unstated major premise. Again, it goes back to why should we use Bitcoin? Can you name
Well,
one
would you
specific
like
unique
would you like
thing?
some examples of how it can help people?
Give me just one example.
Okay. So I live somewhere where the state or whatever controlling body, says, hey, we don't like you're a woman and women aren't allowed to work. So we're going to freeze your financial channels, right?
Okay.
Well, Bitcoin is a way to pirouette around that, like straight out.
But how does that solve the fundamental problem that women are being oppressed?
I mean, financially empowering people, giving them their own bank, like that's a pretty big deal.
No, because if the state can freeze your bank account, if it's going to go that far to freeze women's bank accounts, it can go one step further and freeze crypto bank accounts. If you know this is what I'm talking about the FUD, right? This you have to
You
talk
mean it could
you have to talk bad about this hypothetical scenario where the status quo is going to be horrible in order to make Bitcoin look good. Give me an example in a regular society where there's not this demonic overlord that's going to be screwing with everybody, and that's why we need Bitcoin.
I mean, there's plenty of shitty governments out there, Adam. We don't have to stretch our imagination too hard.
That's true, but
that could be anything from human rights violations.
I don't see how crypto
currency manipulation,
but crypto
right?
doesn't
Like if you
fix
live in
any of that.
Venezuela, if you live in Venezuela and somebody just lit your life savings on fire because they fired up the money printer, right? Like
that's not how
Bitcoin is a source of Bitcoin is a source of empowerment for those people too. You know, we're in the West, we're in the first world. Like I totally get when people come to me and they're like, this, I don't see the use case for this. My life is perfectly fine. Well, of course it is.
You know what?
We
always
live in
amused,
a lot of privilege.
I'm always amused by these first world privileged people acting so concerned about the third world people and how they should buy into this scheme. But if you go over to the third world, you'll find those people don't give a shit about Bitcoin, and it doesn't solve any of their problems. They don't even have fucking phones. They don't have internet access. They don't have smartphones. Most of those people couldn't even access the technology. It is not a solution. This whole let's banking the unbanked.
That's changing. That's changing pretty fast. You know that to be true.
It's not. It's still not fundamentally helping them with the fact that poor people don't have money. They don't have a need for a bank account when they don't have savings to put in a bank account. Again, crypto doesn't fix anything. It's just supposedly a workaround that usually involves violating the law, and I don't see that as a net positive.
I mean, this one upsets me because I do see it as a moral imperative, because there are people around the world. If you're somewhere and you live somewhere that you don't have access to traditional financial rails, like it's debilitating. You can't save.
You know,
right?
I need to get some people on that are that can speak to that, because I think us in the Western world acting concerned about these people is a bit disingenuous.
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say I lose a lot of sleep about the plight of people in the third world. Like I'm not here to do that and pretend like I'm some saint or something. But I think that the use case is pretty evident for those folks.
I disagree. Like I said, I think most of them, they're too poor to have a need for banking, and they lack access to the basic resources, because in order to be able to access crypto, you have to have access to a pretty substantive infrastructure. They probably lack the education, too, to even be able to understand a lot of this stuff. Sure, that's changing as technology further becomes ubiquitous, but it still doesn't really address the core problem that these people, that having access to Bitcoin is not going to elevate the value of their lives. In fact, all it does is take value that they're creating and put it into a network somewhere else, whereas these people need to create value and put it back into their own community. I look at it more like exploitation than anything else. I don't see it being a particular positive.
Well, that's a shame, because, if like I said, you don't have to stretch your mind too hard to come up with a scenario where your life would just be complete shit if you didn't have access to a traditional bank, right? And
millions and millions and millions of people are like that, and they don't even know that they're missing anything. They barter. They have existing ways of dealing with each other. If you introduce them to Bitcoin, they would look at it like some kind of an alien technology that they can't really figure out how it would really benefit them.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, yeah, if you went into the middle of the rainforest and tried to evangelize about Bitcoin, I'm not sure it would go very well. But, necessity is the mother of invention to that end. So,
see, but this is a good example of where we talk in vague generalities. If you gave me a very specific instance of here's somebody in a particular position where Bitcoin is their best and only option, I would like to see that. All I hear is like the Canadian truckers, they could have used Bitcoin. And I'm like, yeah, they violated the law. I'm not condoning them soliciting money from the public so they can continue to be domestic terrorists. That's not to me a use case.
So let's say you're a refugee in the Middle East, right? Um, you can't carry your money with you. Like that's a pretty much a death sentence, especially if you're a woman, because you're probably not even allowed to have it in the first place.
Right.
With Bitcoin, right? You just memorize 12 words and you can carry your entire life's fortune with you, however meager that may be.
Okay,
anywhere.
Let's look at that situation. Okay. First off, it's what I call the exception which proves the rule. It's a super duper atypical fringe situation that very, very, very few people are going to have to deal with, but we'll still take into account. But I want to point out that this is one of those scenarios that it's just fucked up on every level. It's unfortunate this kind of stuff happens. And the real problem is that this stuff happens and crypto doesn't necessarily fix the underlying problem which put somebody in that situation in the first place. But okay, that's a way somebody can move some value across borders. Okay, I get that. But again, it's oversimplified. Finding somebody who would take your real world wealth and convert it into Bitcoin reliably at either end of that transaction is very, very difficult to do. So it is a scenario where it's possible. Somebody could find somebody on the inside.
I'll grant you that
Bitcoin,
when
cross the border.
When it comes to hopping in and out,
yeah,
you're probably going to encounter some problems, and I can't speak to that because I'm not that person in that scenario.
Right.
But I do know that, like, if you lay it out in that way, it's certainly better than having no savings technology. Like the ability to have any savings whatsoever is a total life changer for people, and I don't think we appreciate that because you can't really build a life. You can't build a civilization unless people can take their value that they've earned and store it somewhere and not have it taken from them.
Totally. But let's also take into account this scenario that you've crafted is the most desperate scenario of them all. You have somebody who is fleeing their home, fleeing for their lives, right? They have to leave or they could be murdered is basically what we're talking about. Anybody that would be that desperate that needs to get the fuck out of someplace, the main thing that's most precious to them is their lives of them and their family. Everything else is tertiary. And it would be great to be able to bring, your collection of this and that and all of this other stuff. And maybe you've worked really hard, but a lot of times these refugees don't really have a whole lot of value. And the only value they may have is likely real estate that's now in a dictatorship or a war-torn country that there's no way they can convert into money. So I think the likelihood of somebody being in this scenario and Bitcoin being the answer is slim to none. I'm sure there could be a hypothetical scenario, but usually what it is it's some head of state or some drug or arms dealer who's running from the law who has a lot of money and needs to smuggle it illegally out. I find it's much more likely to be a criminal thing than it is to be some poor innocent person that's
and if you want to take that scenario off the table, that's fine. I grant, that scenario jumps to mind just through bias.
Okay,
that sounds incredibly horrible, but you have to think about, well, okay, we'll take it a step further. There's plenty of countries whose currencies are weak as hell, right? And that makes your life extremely hard.
Not necessarily. Right? It depends. Well, obviously, but the main problem of the weak currency is poor leadership, right? And that's the problem. You might be able to temporarily work around it, but that poor leadership is going to carry over into other things than just the value of money. Zimbabwe's problems are not simply just based on, how inflationary their money is. They've got tons and tons of other problems that,
right. But don't you think having some type of tool in their toolkit that allows them to save their value will improve their society?
Absolutely, but there's a time-tested traditional approach to that that's much simpler than what you're proposing, which is just bartering basic goods and services that have intrinsic value to the locals. Well,
they're probably already doing that.
Yeah, of course they are, because that works. Finding somebody who will take your Bitcoin is going to be significantly harder. So
I
anyway,
guess in the long arc of history, the points that you've raised here about it's extremely difficult for people in these circumstances to not only get educated about this type of technology, but have the means and the infrastructure to execute on it and all that stuff. I grant you that. Absolutely. However, I want you to grant me in return that it's only getting easier and better for them to do that, right? Like
okay.
time marches forward, technology and access and the quality of life improvement marches forward for these folks. So the bar is only getting lower in my estimation.
Okay, well let's unpack that.
Well, that's a
It's
lot
getting
to unpack.
the bar is getting lower in terms of more and more people are having access to the internet and advanced technology. That's true. And the bar is getting lower in that more and more people have access to more information that can educate them about new technologies and things. So I'll grant that in a non-specific way. I do not. I'm not. Is it easier for people to buy and sell Bitcoin now than it was, last month? Maybe, as long as you're not a customer of FTX or Celsius or SafeMoon or Mt. Gox or any of the other exchanges that collapsed.
Genesis,
Yeah, or Quadriga. It's just so again, it depends. But if we look at this timeline where we have A, B, and C, and we're at B, and C is where the value of Bitcoin is going to be much, much higher. Obviously, we're talking about, well, why would somebody want to use Bitcoin? And you're giving me all these fringe, atypical third world use cases. And even if I grant you that those are legitimate, okay, that doesn't get us to the point C that you want. The point C where the value of Bitcoin becomes incredibly high has to be one where regular people are like, oh God, this makes total sense. So,
right.
And I'm not worried about, I am worried about megalomaniacal dictators causing crazy things to happen. I am worried about that, especially in 2024. But I don't think it doesn't motivate me to hold Bitcoin.
Right. You're totally right. Like we just got off on a huge rabbit hole talking about, morality and the third world and improving people's lives and stuff like that. And that stuff usually doesn't hit for folks like us, right? Like it's so far removed from us. I bring it up just because it's such a dire example that it sticks out in my mind. But explaining it to somebody in our position, it's a lot less visceral. It's real slow and kind of plodding. And I was starting to go down that path about talking about, okay, well, if you grant me it's durable or the most durable thing, right? And so if you don't grant me that, then the value proposition blows up right then and there, right? So all these things have to come together about its durability, portability, divisibility, scarcity, fungibility, all of those qualities that come together in this kind of like symphony to make something valuable. So
Even if I did grant you all those elements and say it was durable and it was this and that, the operative issue is it more durable than other alternatives? And this is where I even if I conceded all your points, it has to be better. That's the thing. It has
more durable
to be better.
than what?
People don't like change as a general rule. They get settled into using something and that's what they want to use. What makes people change to use something else is it's a clear improvement. It represents, gives them a specific advantage. Most of these advantages that you guys promote are vague abstractions. They're not specific things. Like, it does not cost less to send money using a crypto transaction than it does a regular fiat transaction. There's plenty of examples where you can send fiat faster and easier than you can send crypto. I know you can cherry pick some weird scenario where if I send $1 million from this country to that country, it's easier, but that's the exception, not the rule. And again, if we're going to get to point C, it's all us regular people that have to be convinced. I'm not the unbanked. I'm not in Zimbabwe.
Right.
I'm not a Canadian trucker.
And you're talking about speed in this particular.
I'm just talking
instance,
about
right?
pragmatism.
And speed. Well, sure. And part of that is the convenience of the speed of it, right? Like how many times can that money vibrate per second? How much entropy is there during that vibration of that money going back and forth from party to party, right? Like that's That's what you're talking about. And you're talking about a system that's had a pretty decent head start. It's got several layers built onto it. I was thinking about this the other day, that like all the credit cards I have are essentially like additional layers on my fiat technology that I operate my finances on, right? And I thought more about it, and I'm like, well, yeah, of course we're not using the base layer of Bitcoin to send, tree fitty back and forth. That's not super efficient to do that. It's only going to process what, 7 transactions a second. So
Yeah, but when I go
that's
to the
just not
bank,
feasible.
when I go to the bank, I don't ask them what version of the software are you running to keep track of my accounts. And I don't assume that the software that they're using this year is the same software they used 5 years ago. They will update and upgrade their systems. Their base level, their level 0
Hmm.
is not written in stone. It's they will optimize it and make it run faster and better. Whereas blockchain is by design kind of hamstrung with its
Yeah,
performance limitations.
it takes an act of Congress to, make a change. Yeah, no, and that's by
But
design, right?
L2
That's
and the L2 solutions for Bitcoin are not added features, right? Credit cards are an added feature on top of the base monetary system. They allow you to carry around a little plastic card. You can buy stuff without having to carry cash, and so it adds an extra feature. But like the Lightning Network is operates very similar to Bitcoin in terms of how the software and the systems that you need, but it's even more complicated. And all it ultimately it tries to achieve is to make Bitcoin's base network transaction settlement appear to be a little bit more efficient. So it's compensating for a design flaw in the Bitcoin network that hamstrings it to only being able to do between 4 and 7 transactions per second.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that a flaw. I mean, that's by design. That's done on purpose.
Well,
Um,
whether it's on purpose or not, it's unsuitable as a
yeah,
as a as a way
it
for
makes
handling day-to-day
right.
transactions.
It makes the base layer inadequate for day-to-day transactions.
And
Completely
like the
correct.
Lightning Network is also inadequate because that requires pre-funding and setting up these channels
Yeah,
beforehand.
you got to seed the channel and all
And it
that.
takes
Yeah.
like an hour to open a channel, and it takes an hour to close a channel. So
Yeah.
its settlement time is obnoxiously worse than anything else we've got.
Right. But I mean, give the devil his due here, right? It's gonna make it to where if I'm gonna do I know I'm gonna do a bunch of transactions with a certain vendor, and maybe that vendor has sub vendors. You could see Lightning's case coming into view, and then if you look even further, you could say, oh, okay, well maybe we could build something on top of that then starts to make it even faster still.
Yeah, but
So
we have these same facilities in the real world, just
and
having an
right.
account with a particular vendor. You know,
And this is a point you've brought up many, many times, right? It's like we've already got all this stuff in operation now,
uh
so
huh.
why are we doing this project, right?
I
And
mean, I
that's
understand wanting to reinvent the wheel, but the newly invented wheel needs to turn more efficiently, move a little bit
yeah.
faster, be cheaper to produce. Then it's
Well,
worth using. But when you present this wheel to me that's not even round, and it costs the amount of electricity of Argentina to keep it
yeah.
rolling, I'm like, and you think that's going to be around in a
Right.
hundred years?
And that's why like I said, I've never been on the, rah currency bandwagon. I've seen the capability of it as that store of value right out of the
But even as a
get-go.
store of value, it's the same dynamic. Um,
Hmm?
what makes you think people in the future are going to suddenly see something that we haven't seen?
Well,
If there was
we've
some
been trying
obvious
to
thing, we wouldn't be arguing. This would be a very short podcast. You'd be like, "Well, it does this better than anything else," and I'd be like, "Whoa, okay, you're right." That's the ultimate
so
crypto question. Just show me one thing blockchain does that's better than non-blockchain technology. That's not criminal. Can't get that question answered. Every other technology out there that has taken hold has been able
I
to
don't,
answer that.
well, Adam, I don't know of anything that is as durable, portable, divisible, fungible, and scarce as Bitcoin. So I know you think I'm gish galloping over this stuff and
Yeah.
I'm begging all these questions and things, but like we kind of have to do that to have a discussion. So if you disagree with any of those points, we can dive into that. But I've yet to hear on my end of this table, I've yet to hear anybody persuade me otherwise about
All
those
right. Okay.
attributes.
All right.
So
Hold on a minute.
that's
Hold on a minute. I'm
yeah.
pulling. Can you hear this?
Yeah.
That's a $20 bill. It's pretty darn portable. I don't need the internet. I don't need electricity. I don't need to have access to Wi-Fi or cellular or an internet services account. I don't need any passwords. This is a transfer of value and a store of value, and it's really, really portable. I can stick it in my pocket. I can give it to somebody.
So
that's pretty portable.
If you sent me $20 right now via Venmo or PayPal or whatever have you, how long do you think it would take before we hit final settlement?
Well, typically within seconds.
No, incorrect. It would take probably 3 days.
No. You're confusing the consumer protection things with the actual transfer of value. When you send money from, because our technology works at the speed of light. Any delay is for consumer protections or its policy of the particular agency that you're going through. Like when you send a check to somebody, the bank may hold it for 3 days before crediting your account. That's often the result of regulations and laws. It's not a limitation of the technology. That transfer went through instantly, or the bank intentionally delayed the transaction because of policy, but it wasn't a limitation of the technology. There's a difference there. And the same situation applies in crypto when you want to on and off ramp crypto into fiat. You run into that same policy thing that puts additional delays in there. It's important to not confuse the capabilities of the tech with restrictions that might be the result of policies.
Just because we've gotten to a point where that, you send me that $20 and that $20 is effectively mine, it does not mean, however, that the transaction is ended and closed, is what I'm trying to say. There are still processes that have to unwind in the background for the value transfer to complete and all the intermediaries to be made whole.
Not necessarily. There may be a certain time period where there's a chargeback that could be allowed, and after that time period, there's no more chargeback.
That's when you get into the extra layers, right? Like a credit card, like payment for a credit card, we're talking final settlement after what, 90 days?
No. There's settlement and there's capture. Capture is when you initiate the transaction, and then settlement is when the transaction resolves into the accounts. Now, because these credit card companies use money on account creatively to create additional income, they factor in these grace periods as part of their contracts with each consumer or business, whereas higher or lower interest rates may increase the amount of settlement time. Again, it all depends. With PayPal, I could PayPal somebody, and within seconds that money is in their PayPal account, and they can turn around and send that somewhere else if they want, immediately. Now, depending upon the amount and depending upon the type of service you use, there may be some additional restrictions. But in a general sense, it's as efficient. It's more efficient than most crypto transactions. It requires less steps, and there's less consumer protections with crypto. I just don't see crypto being a clear improvement there.
Consumer protections, I mean,
that's what consumers want, though. Consumer protections weren't something that the banks foisted on
everyone.
People. I mean, if it weren't for the Fair Credit Billing Act of 1976, every fraudulent credit transaction would be the consumers that are faulted. But because of the law, it's the credit card companies that have to bear the burden, and they're the ones that can take the loss. That was a policy decision based on consumers, getting taken advantage of. And chances are, if crypto became more popular, we'd see those similar features applied to crypto. And crypto kind of
I completely agree.
Yeah, it would basically turn into what we already have.
Correct.
Which begs the question, why do we need it when we already have what we already have?
The why do we need it? For me, the why do we need it drills down to the differences in outcome between a hard money and a soft money, right? Like that's the base layer.
What's the difference between hard money and soft money? Explain that to me.
Effectively, like it's all about centralized control and where it originates from, right? Like, can there be more of it? Who's in charge of it? Who makes changes to it, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, but people can make changes to Bitcoin too. You just
Right. But the process of doing so is extraordinarily onerous, right?
it's more nebulous. That's true, but I would the policy, the existing monetary policy has got a ton of checks and balances. Now, if people as citizens don't take advantage of their civic duty to petition their leaders to pursue monetary policy in a certain way they want, then they have nobody to blame but themselves. If you're on the phone with your representative and you say, I want to prioritize paying down the national debt. If enough people did that, we would do that. Or I want to prioritize reducing the amount of fiat in circulation. Then there would be steps to be done. But that's not what people are. That's not their priority. So we do have a mechanism that has a little bit more clarity to how we get what we want in the existing system than in crypto. You have no idea. I actually really do believe after this halvening, there's going to be a lot of miners that are going to be like, I can't fucking make any money. I'm not going to do this anymore. And so the hash power is going to drop by probably 70, 80%. And I'm not saying the blockchain will disappear, but there's not going to be enough meat there that's going to justify their expense. And so I think adoption will slow down, and I think the price of Bitcoin will go down. And somebody's going to have to do something.
Just real quick, if you might have studied up on this because it's not on the top of my mind. How does the hash rate correlate with the halvening, historically speaking?
As far as pricing, I don't really know. I haven't done a whole lot of research, but typically the price gets kind of a little bit volatile before the halvening, and then.
Well, I'm not even talking about price. I'm just talking about the hash rate, like just the amount of miners involved. Because from what I can tell, just like eyeballing the historical charts, it doesn't look like it correlates all that much. I mean, you see this gigantic gulf whenever China banned it. But other than that, it's looked like a pretty steady march upwards. So if you're calling for a 70 to 80% drawdown in hash rate, that is earth shattering, man. So
yeah,
I mean, I don't get me wrong. I appreciate putting your flag in the ground. Cutting
the amount of the mining reward in half is a rather significant thing.
Well, it's significant, but it's also it's not a surprise. It's been written in the Bible for a while now, and I mean, I'm a little bit out of my depth on this one, but I'll give a stab at it. That miners operate in a way where after the halvening is when they actually make their most money, because that's when supply drops and the miners sit on the largest supply of Bitcoin, at least in terms of what can be liquidated. And so that's when they make their.
The Bitcoin market is the Bitcoin market. There's always somebody out there willing to sell. It's not like everybody else is holding Bitcoin and the only source for new Bitcoin is going to be mining rewards.
Not the only one.
I actually think the miners hold on to their Bitcoin not because it's what's precious about the mined Bitcoin is that it's clean. It's not dirty. This is another thing that we haven't talked about that I think you should be worried about is not all Bitcoin is equal, because of this ledger, because the ledger tracks where all the crypto has moved from what wallet to what wallet. We know that there are blacklisted wallets. There are, if there's cyber terrorists out there and we can see the transactions paid for ransoms and we can see black money and dark money traveling on the blockchain. And if that money touches somebody else's wallet, it can taint that wallet. And anybody who needs to be compliant with sanctions would risk the integrity of their company touching that wallet. I don't know if you know how clean your wallet is, like where your Bitcoin came from. And that could be an issue. You go to open an account, you transfer some Bitcoin, and this is why I was worried when you said you only had 2 wallets, because once something from a dirty address goes into a larger wallet, all of the crypto in that wallet is now contaminated. And any crypto that moves out could theoretically be that ransom payment. So it just
Yeah.
depends on where. One of the things that people don't talk about is the real value in mining is to have that clean Bitcoin that you can guarantee was not part of any kind of criminal transaction.
Yeah, hasn't been. Yeah, well, that's one of the things that I've always been curious about in terms of like Bitcoin's future is this cat and mouse game between the technologists who keep constantly inventing new ways to obscure Bitcoin versus your identity, and you know, I don't know where that end game concludes. I get the feeling that eventually the cat is going to get tired of chasing the mouse because I think the mouse is always going to be able to come up with ways to obscure that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a big question mark, and this is very close to another topic that I was thinking about recently, and that is what is what is life like in a not a fully Bitcoinized world or whatever, but just like a life where Bitcoin is generally accepted as personal property, right? And it's not necessarily like under the ire of the government, and governments have learned to at least coexist with it or something like that, right?
But
Um,
why would a government peacefully coexist with a monetary system that is overtly violating its laws, right? If the government,
mm,
in order to
well,
control our economy and keep it intact, we have to be able to control bad transactions. We have to stop
yeah,
criminal money. We have to stop sanction stuff. It's just part of the rules of our society.
that's
So they can't.
we're getting now we're getting into politics and philosophy, right? Is
But I mean, it's really important. You predict a future where governments will peacefully coexist with Bitcoin without any problems, and I think that there's some hurdles there that you can't just casually jump over.
I think the more liberal the society, the more able they will be able to do that, right? Like there's a reason why China was the first ones to kind of like cross that barrier and say, we're putting a stop to this. More liberal democracies you're going to see are going to be more capable of coexisting with it. Where I was going with that line of thought was more like there's a lot of people in the Bitcoin space who are just overtly anti-statist. Like they're just anarchists
But
who just
Bitcoin
want to,
requires the state to exist because it provides the infrastructure it depends on.
or yeah, and
So that
that's
doesn't make
why
sense to be anti-statist. But that's like a typical libertarian fantasy. They want all the resources that society provides. They just don't want any of the responsibilities.
they don't want to pay for it. Yeah. Well, that's where I was kind of going with this is that I am liberal by nature politically. I'm not on the conservative end or the libertarian end. And I think, funding the government is important. The government does a
Right.
lot of things that no other entity can
I
do.
like my running water and my roads and my
Yeah,
trash
yeah,
pickup.
I like those things. I want to be able to send my kids to school, that type of thing. Go to the hospital, whatever. But uh, so like how do we make it there, right? And one of the one of the only ways I see is that Caesar has to collect what is Caesar's,
Right.
and how do we do that in a digital property world? And I think the only way you're going to get there is you're going to see more tangible assets that are not subject to capital flight are going to start getting taxed a lot, and consumption will be taxed a lot more in the future, right? Because I can't pick up my house and move. I can't airlift my house out to a
Well,
different
the
country.
cost to maintain a comfortable society is high, and so taxes do that. If you don't pay taxes, then you don't have. There's a lot of other things that you're going to lose. You're going to lose personal property rights. You're going to lose the internet. The internet would not exist without governments and taxes. So if you think that the government is going to allow some system to steal their tax dollars, they're
Well,
not.
that's what
That's
I'm
not going to
getting at is
happen.
I think that there is a way for peaceful coexistence, and there will be some. I think there's probably going to be friction. I don't know how much. You know, that's a big guess to make,
Well,
and
speaking
you
of
keep
friction, I think you need
yeah
to start testing. Whether or not this system is reliable. I think you should try to at least pull six figures out of your account.
yeah. This came up.
Try to pull at
I
least 100,000 to 200,000 out, and then you'll take a capital gains hit and pay it. and then if you want to put it right back in, whatever. But I think you may find it's a lot more difficult. Now you've got a Coinbase account, right? One of the things you need to do is
No, I don't mess with Coinbase anymore. But yeah, so I did.
Well, whatever account that you would use to liquidate it, you need to look up their terms of service and you need to look up their limitations. Coinbase has everybody who has an account at Coinbase has a limit of how much in transactions they're allowed to do. Everything will operate fine until you hit that limit, and then it just shuts everything down. Maybe it's $25,000. But if you want to do anything beyond that limit, you have to start jumping through some hoops, contacting them, and so it would behoove you to do some research to find out. Because right now, if there's ever a time that you should be able to easily get your money out, it should be now. So you should think about now versus the future. If it's going to be hard now, I don't know if I would assume it's going to be any easier in the future.
So, yeah, all of that money that you're referencing is unless something's gone horribly wrong, it should not be touched in the next 10 years, right?
Yeah, but it's possible in the next 10 years, Bitcoin could go back to being worth $400, $500 a thing. And you could lose.
That's the dividing line between you and I is I can't see it, man. I just can't. Based on the value proposition as I understand it. I know you disagree with that, and that's why we're on this call, and that's all good.
And look, I have no material interest one way or another, whether you believe me or not. I sincerely would not like to see you lose, your principal.
No, I never thought otherwise. That would be horrible to wish that upon somebody.
But if I was a crypto holder, I would have a material interest in saying, "Man, you're doing great, man. I envy you. You're onto something, man. I believe totally in what you're doing. I completely agree." There would be an absolute material reason for me to do that.
That's the self-selection bias you kind of hinted on the last time we talked, right? Is that so yeah. I thought about this for a hot second about, if I were going to quote unquote diversify, what would I do? Right. I would probably start leaking out maybe at a certain percentage every month into something like a REIT. I feel like real estate is really the only other thing I would be interested in getting involved in because
I agree with you, but I also think real estate is now with the insurance situation and global climate change. You can't be just real estate in general. I think you have to be picky. About like I'm sitting on top of a couple of properties now that are in an area that's going to be adversely affected by climate change. Now I have some properties in other areas that are probably going to do better because of it. And so I'm shifting my focus because of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess that just tells you where my mind is at and like what type of assets I like to hold. I'm under the belief that, the asset that I currently hold is as hard can be. And so the next hardest thing I could imagine would be real estate, but real estate comes with its own set of risks. Obviously you have to pay property tax, which is a big one.
But real estate is hard, it's
as hard.
It's immutable.
Yeah. Well, it's immutable, unless there are things that can happen to you in the real estate world. Maybe this is
the government gets silly, overthrown or eminent domain.
Eminent domain,
but that's pretty rare,
maybe the house that you want to turn into a rental property gets a hurricane hits it or catches on fire or whatever. There's material concerns there. So I'm not going to say I haven't given any thought to that, but in terms of diversifying for diversity's sake, just like I feel like that's an older notion where when we used to hold, the typical investor would just hold a basket of different stocks. And, let's say you had your tech stock basket and you had Apple and HP and Gateway, and you were just spreading it out because you didn't know who was going to win.
Right.
You didn't know who the best one was.
And I've done that and I've kind of had a wash and sometimes I've done well,
Yeah, well, that's why we do the diversification is because whenever we're unsure, diversity is really the best
So why
strategy.
did you deviate from that with Bitcoin?
Because I don't feel like it's unsure.
Huh.
That's the whole thing, right? That's the whole crux of it is I would not, and that's why people are asking you for proof of my positions on all this stuff, because it's
Just remember,
talking a big game.
in the future, when you want to make this podcast disappear, you're going to have to pay me in fiat.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've already made my peace with that. Like I said, I
That's
feel
okay.
like
You're anonymous. You just did deny. Oh, that wasn't me.
yeah, yeah.
Or you could rub my nose in it, right? When Bitcoin is worth $1 million, I just don't see. I just don't see. And I really do want to. I'm a person that likes actionable things. I want evidence and logic and reason. And
Yeah.
I know. I guess you see it differently, but I would just say, look, if you've doubled your money, take some of it out, man. Just no matter how much conviction you have, right? You don't double down on everything. You pull some of it out. Even take, because I think there's a very, very real possibility that all of these exchanges are much more shady than anybody thinks, and everything works fine until you start to pull out a big chunk, and then it's like all these drawbridges come up and chains and stuff come down. And it would behoove you, since your money is very consolidated into a small number of wallets, to do some analysis, find out if your wallets are clean. Find out, because there's a site where you can put a wallet address in, and it'll measure the likelihood of that wallet, having tainted crypto
Risk level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, if you want to email that to me, that'd be awesome.
I'll tell you what, I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm sure some people will put some comments on the YouTube and tell us more.
Somebody knows it. One thing I wanted to get out, this is a little bit changing gears, and I meant to bring this up in the beginning, but we're getting to the end here. But I want to say that I have a lot of sympathy to people who feel like Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, right? That there is no there.
Uh-huh.
Because I feel like it's super easy for me, because I used to be in those shoes. I used to look at it like, side-eyed. I used to feel and think and see it that way as well. So it's not that hard for me to empathize with that feeling, right? The idea that this asset could monetize suddenly, it's just and the idea that this could take hold and spread across the world and become a new system of money, like that's just such a wild, unrealistic concept.
So how did things change for you? Did it involve ayahuasca or anything like that?
Yes, yeah.
Were you in some?
Yeah, I know.
Were you in some kind of TP, barfing your guts up, and then you woke up and you went, "Bitcoin is hard money"? Because
some spiritual experience.
What was there a moment where you could identify where it became all clear to you and you could hear angels singing, or what?
Once I became convinced that it could not be destroyed, I think that was the catalyst, because
But you do recognize there is a scenario where it can be destroyed. You admit that.
Like I said, yes, I can admit that. However, I put the chances of that as close to zero as more than anything else I could put my value into. You know what I'm saying? Like
Okay.
there's never a zero chance of just about anything on Earth, right? Like
all right, but what are the odds? Okay, so whatever numbers on that Bitcoin the blockchain will cease to operate. What are the odds that the dollar will become utterly worthless? You think it's more likely that's going to happen, or more likely that Bitcoin will stop working?
Yeah, I've wondered about
those
that,
two
right?
things right there are often right next to each other.
Yeah, right. They live very, very close
now,
to each other.
Look, I have my complaints about the national debt and our monetary system and how we are doing a lot of deflationary spending and stuff like that, inflationary spending. We absolutely need to pay down the debt and get control. But that can happen if we just put the right responsible people in power. And we had that during the Clinton administration. We actually reduced the deficit. But ever since then, the only time anybody talks about the debt and out of control spending is when they're not in power. Then when they get in power, suddenly they never talk about it.
Yeah. The future of the dollar, like, getting into the whole macroeconomics thing, it I guess if I'm placing my bets, right? Like nobody knows what's going to happen. I do know, like, and everybody knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that the dollar is always going to be soft money, right? It's always going to be centrally controlled. It is always going to be malleable, right? And that's an attack
and
surface.
ubiquitous.
That's a vector. Well,
As long as you have a
sure.
society, because money is what is the lubrication that makes our society go. So
Right.
if
And I'm never probably gonna, in my lifetime at least, I'm gonna be dealing with dollars
right,
until the day they put me in the grave. And I've made my peace with that.
well,
Like I
it's
don't
it's
have any argument
necessary.
against
I
it.
mean, and even if you could convince government to switch from dollars to Bitcoin, the practicality of the Bitcoin network wouldn't make it function as well. So
Right. Not at this point. No, not at all. Yeah.
so it's always going to be around. So I think the argument that it's a hedge against inflation is not necessarily valid because you're always going to be subject to inflation because you have to use those on and off ramps. I don't. One of the things I do not see is do not see more and more places accepting Bitcoin as payment. That growth
Oh
curve
yeah.
seems to have plateaued a long time ago.
Hmm.
Now we could argue over whether or not there's more liquidity coming into the Bitcoin market in general, and that to me is a driving force that's supposed to make the price go up. You've got to have more people buy into it. Again, I'm not seeing that. The ETFs mainly caused more of a lateral move than anything else.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this point
Hmm.
C that you're planning to retire at, where it's going to be worth a lot more, I don't see a lot of evidence that that's a reliable thing to hope for. You know, so
Hmm.
maybe you're right, but I don't see the I don't see the path there being that clear. And even if you are
The
right,
value gain. Yeah.
take some of that money out, man. Test to see whether you can. Go to an
Well,
exchange, and
well,
because there's less exchanges now than there were 2 years ago. There's a lot
so
less.
I'm going to drop a little bit of, well, maybe you won't be surprised by this. Who knows? So last time we talked, I mentioned that I'm not levered, right? Um, and there was a good reason for that, right? I have a family to support,
Hmm.
so on and so forth. I would never, collateralize my house,
Right.
right? That my kids sleep in. I couldn't conscionably do that because nobody knows the future. But I decided after our last conversation and some of the research, especially like the tether stuff we got into, and I was like, oh crap, this might be a real weak point.
Hmm.
And the conclusion I came to was that okay, it's going to be a possible risk for volatility, but I don't think it's an existential crisis. Um, I decided to actually take out a small uncollateralized loan, and I fully admit that this is risk behavior. This is like true risk that I'm entering into now. And so I took out a small uncollateralized loan, and I am betting that the Bitcoin price after this halving is going to go up quite a bit.
So
And
you're doing some leverage stuff.
yeah, I'm levered a little bit now, and I'm doing this as kind of an experiment because I could totally, even if literally I get wiped, it's not enough money to like put a dent in my life plans. It
It,
would suck, no doubt,
mhm.
but I've totally clear-eyed and and cogent here that I understand I am betting on something happening, and if it doesn't, I got to eat the I got
Okay.
to eat the consequences. So we're gonna see. I'm starting this experiment where I will invest this money. It's five figures. I don't want to get into specifics. Five figures. I'm going to invest and put it in, put it aside and invest it and leave it for one calendar year at the halving. And after that halving, whatever it is, it is. And I'm just going to sell out of that and just see what happened with that
So
experiment.
how high does Bitcoin have to get for you to see a return on this?
Um, I mean,
Like, what is it right now? What does it have to be?
well, I guess it's 70, it's floating around 70. So as long as it's over 70 in a year, I mean, obviously, if you want to keep up with inflation, you got to earn somewhere between 7 to 10%.
So you're not betting
So
it's going to go up. You're just betting it's not going to go down then.
I mean, if you want me to, I think I will double my money. That's my guess.
So you think it's going to go up 2x? within a year?
I think Bitcoin in this bull run is going to surpass 100,000, and my guess is that it will probably at least 2x.
Okay.
So that's the risk I'm taking now, and this is more, like I said, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I know I'm going out on a limb.
Okay.
I've got no co-signers on this risk. This is just me
All right.
saying, all right, I'm putting a bet on the table. I'm going to test my knowledge of this sector, and I'm going to live with the consequences.
Okay. Well, I'll make a prediction too. Since you've made a prediction, I'll make a prediction. And I'm not just going to make a prediction based on what I believe. I'm going to explain to you precisely scenarios where I think this is going to happen and how it's going to affect the price. But before I get to that, and I know we've been on for a long time, so we'll wrap this up. There was a guy in our Discord who was doing options against Bitcoin in this traditional market. And he was telling us, I'm putting my money where my mouth is. I don't believe in Bitcoin, so I'm betting on it to go down. And we all told him, dude, this is an irrational market. There's no fundamentals. Betting against a crooked casino is just as risky when you're in the casino. And he said, yeah, I know, but I'm willing to take that chance. And he told us what the number was that Bitcoin had to drop below or else he would get liquidated. And it was just like the entire time Bitcoin just hovered right around that number between him getting margin called or whatever. And it drove him crazy. And then he just disappeared. We never, like he deleted his account. We were all nice to him. We were all like, dude, good luck with this, but I wouldn't do this. And he just went poof. We have no idea what happened to him. We didn't even, we weren't going to rub his nose in it. We were just going to go like, you should, but he just disappeared. So it's a scary way to exist. And this is, like I said, this is an unsecured loan. I'm not watching margins, none of that. Okay. This is literally, I'm going to peek in. I set a timer, 365 days from now, I'll get an alert saying, hey, it's been 1 year since the halving. Check your investment. And, if you're underwater, you're underwater, and that's what you lost. But this is just. Well, one of the things in our community that we often do that we shouldn't really be doing is price predictions, because you got to preface it all with this is such an irrational market, I'm of the belief that there is so much market manipulation here that it's really impossible to predict the future, because there's no fundamentals, there's nothing you can really look at that's solid. Past performance is not an indication of future returns, especially with crypto. But I will say, I think there are some things that are on the horizon that I do think will have an effect on the price of Bitcoin. First off, if you look at the printing of Tether, how much Tether is in circulation over time, and you cross-reference that with the price of Bitcoin, you will see there is a clear correlation there. Tether produces millions and millions, billions now, of USDT right about the same time that the market goes up. So there's some circumstantial evidence there that indicates that Tether is pumping the market up. There's this huge influx of pseudo liquidity in the form of Tether that all the major exchanges are using as a proxy for money, and then the price goes up. We've seen it time and time again. Whenever crypto goes up, we see a Tether print or 5 Tether prints, and that is continuing to happen. There's a Twitter account called Whale Tracker or something like that, which tweets whenever there's a Tether print or big moves of crypto from one exchange to another. And that's worth paying attention to, because there's clear, I can't say it's causation, because nobody really knows what goes on behind the scenes at these exchanges. It's all private and non-transparent, and there's no regulatory bodies that are looking at what Coinbase and KuCoin and Bitfinex are actually doing. But there's a lot of studies out there that have shown there's a lot of evidence that it's wash trading and market manipulation. And they're all located outside of the jurisdiction of areas, so there's nobody really to look over them. So that's suspect, that the market, nobody really knows what the natural organic demand is for Bitcoin. Obviously, there are real people buying and selling at the supposed market price, but we don't know whether that's 1% of the trades or 50% of the trades or 90% of the trades. I think
Well,
it's probably like 5%
yeah.
of the trades is what I think. I think 5% of the transactions are organic. One study said 97% was wash trading. So here's what I think is going to happen. I think a year from now, the price of Bitcoin is probably going to be below what it is today. It might go up a little bit, but it's becoming harder and harder and harder to keep the price of Bitcoin up. More and more Tether is having to flood the market to produce this kind of bull-looking run that attracts real liquidity in. And it all depends on how many people try to cash out. That's kind of the operative thing. Nobody knows how much liquidity there really is on hand at Coinbase or Binance. But we do see stories when people try to cash out that things don't always happen the way they want. This is why I was impressed upon you to try to pull out 6 figures or more, because you may find that you hit a wall and you just can't do it.
I'm guessing that if I tried to do 6 figures, I would probably have to shop exchanges to find one that I could do that on and do it on, with a certain level of confidence.
Yeah, and I don't know how you would go about that. I mean, I don't know what exchange would be more trustworthy than, say, Coinbase, and I don't think Coinbase is very trustworthy. But at least they're a public company based out of the U.S.
The two companies that would come to mind for me would be Unchained and Swan, in terms of places that I would trust to do very large transactions like that. But I can tell you, I'm probably not going to do 6 figures, at least until like a long time from now. But the good news is that since I've started this little 1-year experiment, we will have, because I'm going to need to cash that out at the end of that 1 year. I got the loan to pay off, whatever else. So at least in the 5 figures, I will be having to conduct that experiment and go through an exchange and convert and all that stuff. So we'll have another anecdote to chew on.
Well, if Tether gets busted, that's going to have a major correction in the market.
Yeah, I fully will give you the credit that like now I am exposed to Tether. Like
everybody is
in doing this. Mm-hmm. Well, from a timeline perspective, I'm exposed to Tether far more than I was before I decided to do this little 1-year buy-in experiment, right? Like I didn't consider that 10 to 20 year time frame of savings to be all that endangered by Tether's malfeasance or whatever else. But this little 1-year window, like if I get to 365 days from now and then Tether goes poof, yeah, I could be hurting or something like that. So, and that's, like I said, I went into that open-eyed. So,
but also think about it like this. Crypto, Bitcoin has not really been able to stand on its own feet in the last decade. It has had to kind of partner with other things. It has to involve NFTs, has to involve tokenized assets, has to involve ETFs, now its course is crypto plus AI. If crypto really were the future, it should just be able to stand on its own 2 feet and not have to glom on to whatever new promising fad or technology there is. And this is what we're seeing. And I think what's going to affect future prices, people are going to get fatigued. They're going to get tired of hearing, oh, now it's blockchain enabled this. Web3 didn't take off. NFTs fizzled. Every time there's some new thing in crypto, everybody gets super excited and then it flames out. And I think the ETF thing is going to do the same thing. I think, this is the honeymoon phase. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because Bitcoin doesn't create any value, unlike dividend producing stocks. So the only way that it'll go up is there has to be an increasing recruitment of new people buying in. And again, new people need to be convinced as to why they should buy in. And this hype cycle, it's just the same thing over and over. I know you believe in it long term, but I don't see that growth happening, and that's what's necessary. But I also see big players in the market that are clearly doing stuff that's illegal. Tether is obviously dealing with money launderers. Everybody knows it, and people are going, well, why won't the government crack down? Well, I think the government is in the process of doing that. The feds are very methodical. They're not going to take Tether down until they have they have a pretty good solid case. And
Oh
Tether
yeah,
probably has
yeah.
its tendrils into so many other dark markets that it's like the FBI doing some kind of undercover investigation and then suddenly finding out MI5 is also involved, and
Yeah, right.
there's probably so many crime syndicates that are entangled with the crypto industry. Excuse me. That you
Well,
have to be careful.
for my sake, let's hope it blows up 300, 70 days out and not 365 because I've set myself. This is how I'm trying to avoid being like getting sucked into the doom loop of being a trader. Is I set hard rules for myself. I'm saying, I've got a exact time limit on when I'm buying and when I'm getting out, and I'm not going to chase, try to time the bottom and then time the top and all that crap. I'm not doing that. So yeah, well, it sounds like we still have a lot of stuff to chop up regarding the value proposition supposedly of Bitcoin and where we differ on that and how I can prove it to you in one way or another or otherwise. So there's plenty of fields left to till, but this has
Yeah.
been another good 2 hours, man. I appreciate you having me on again.
Yeah, and I'm here, so if you ever want to chat, we can continue this, and we'll just see how things go.
Yeah, for sure. I'm always, we can take things offline if we need to, but in the meantime,
And look, if you want to, if you want to engage with some more people, you can drop into our Discord. And,
oh yeah.
I'm sure we've got a really nice community that won't be too hostile or anything like that.
Okay. I was keeping it strictly to you because I feel like, when you get into the madness of crowds, like
Yeah.
those folks would probably just tear me apart.
Well, let me ask you something. Does your family know that you're into Bitcoin?
No, like I said earlier, I've spoken to plenty of people through traditional internet means,
Do you
right?
think your wife would approve of it?
Man,
Would she give you a hard time, or would she just trust you?
I we're pulling back some personal curtains here, and I'm not super comfortable getting into it. But let me just summarize this thought this way. My wife knows about things that I don't know about, and I know about things that she doesn't know about. And as a married couple, as a partnership, we trust each other to do things on each other's behalf and for each other's edification and benefit all the time. This is one of those things that falls under my purview. And like I said, everything I have risked so far is in my name. None of it I'm not crossing any barriers with that because I couldn't do that in good conscience, and I would have to educate her. And knowing what I know about her, this is the least interesting thing on the planet to her. So it's one of those, the time will come, but that time is not now.
But when that time comes, wouldn't it be a little bit more comfortable to say, okay, half of my money is in the traditional investments and half of my money is in crypto? I mean, it's a great kind of hedge against
hedge against
divorce.
Yeah.
You can hedge against inflation, but you might want to also hedge against, family strife.
Yeah.
Diversification is helpful for that too.
Well, that's part of why I'm having these conversations is I'm trying to really hone my understanding as much as I can.
Yeah,
and
but since I last talked to you, you've made another bet. That's not the way it's supposed to go. You're supposed to go, hey, Adam, you made me really think. I'm going to pull some money out. You can't
I know
you thought the opposite.
You thought I was going to go in the opposite direction, but I didn't. And that's.
I don't want to say I told you so. I really, honestly don't want to have to do that. Not that you'd probably go poof like this other guy. I'd never hear from you again. Like, whatever happened to that guy?
Yeah, right. No, I like I said, I'm not. At least for the purposes of this experiment, I'm not doing anything that's going to send me down to the poorhouse or whatever. So, a calculated risk, which everyone in life has to take. The big picture stuff with the retirement accounts and all that. I'm still trust me, that ball is still making its way down the Plinko machine for me. I've not totally ruled out diversifying into other things and whatever else, but for the time being,
just remember, we're of the belief this is a giant decentralized Ponzi scheme. And while it has some interesting properties that allow it to kind of operate a lot longer than it probably seems like it should, like all Ponzi schemes, there does come a point where it does collapse. It may never collapse completely, but it's very, very possible. We've seen it with SafeMoon. We've seen it with so many other crypto schemes. And functionally, Bitcoin really isn't fundamentally any different than any of these other ones. It's just bigger. So it might take longer before that happens. But when it happens, it's going to happen very, very fast. And there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be like, I need to get out of this market, and they're not going to be able to get out.
I think that's a point of agreement for us, is that I think if it's the philosophy or the ethos of like gradually then suddenly, right? I think that we're going to do a gradual then sudden rise, and you think we're going to do a gradual then sudden collapse.
No, I think it's going to be a gradual decline marked by occasional pumps and occasional dumps. You know, I think it's just,
I can't see it going sideways for it's eventually it's one of those. I think it's like it's going to have a moment where it's either going to the bedrock truth of its value proposition is going to be understood, and it's like, okay, we're either going to a zero or we're going to outer space on this one.
Well, think about it like this, okay? If Bitcoin was going to organically grow, which is what's necessary in order to meet your return goals, it has to organically grow, which means that there just should be a natural increase in retail people who want to get into the market. What we've seen is that has not materialized, which is why they had to partner with ETFs. These ETFs are just a scheme to desperately get some liquidity into the market. And most of that liquidity is coming from an existing crypto market. So
I don't want to dive down another rabbit hole.
But
we
this
got to
growth
wrap this,
that you're expecting,
I
doesn't
disagree
appear to
that
be
they're partnering with the ETFs. Like that's the financial entities. I mean, partnering. You can't partner with something that doesn't have any.
When you buy into the ETF, you're still
you know?
playing with regular money. You're not actually, and it's a little bit safer than the Bitcoin market. So I think the ETFs are going to be. I think in the future they may be a more accurate gauge of the actual traffic and transactions in Bitcoin than the actual blockchain itself, or what the exchanges are telling you. Should be
you might be right about that. They do give us a whole new set of data to monitor the inflows and the outflows and
right, because you can't get into the ETFs without using actual money, so there's none of that tether crap in there.
Right. Yeah. Well, the good news is that, like I said, all this stuff over the next year, I think it's going to be very illuminating, and we're all going to learn a lot. And hopefully, you and I will have many conversations as that year unfolds.
Yeah. And I look forward to talking to you from your own private island.
Oh man, you're not.
Look out for those little mini monkeys, man. They could be very valuable.
You're not sticking me on a tiny island with two little kids, man. No way.
All right. Well,
Adam.
As always, thank you, and we'll look forward to hearing from you again in the future.
All right, brother. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
So there you go. Another episode, another discussion with our infamous crypto unicorn. What do you think? Are you feeling more comfortable with what he's doing or less comfortable? Be sure to share your comments in the YouTube comment section. That's at youtube.com/American Scream Video, all one word. And be sure to visit our website at IORadio.org and catch us on our Discord. And you can find links to all of that as well as all of our other content at IORadio.org.